afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's feature speaker series. On behalf of Asian Development Bank Institute, I would like to thank all the participants for joining us today. It is an honor for me to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Lee Branstetter. I first had an opportunity to interact with Professor during our conversation when I was trying to incentivize Professor to contribute to our edited volume on innovation, and she kindly accepted to contribute a chapter, and this also shows how much she takes care about policy, not only the research. Through this is it okay? So through discussion, I'm sorry. Today's seminar is closely linked with our ADDI flagship program, Shaping Asia's Future Prosperity with Quality Growth. This is just for our information. So future speaker seminars will be closely aligned with our flagship program hereafter, and we will let you know as time in the right time. And today's topic, today's presentation is closely aligned with Pillar 3, Digital Transformation and Innovation. As you all know, this pillar examines how technological advances can enhance productivity, competitiveness, and long-term economic growth and development. As we are all aware of, all the policymakers, researchers, and businesses are increasingly asking these fundamental questions. How much does AI innovation actually contributes to productivity growth? And Professor Branstetter's presentation today on quantifying the impact of AI innovation on productivity addresses this important question, and will also provide some convincing empirical evidence. Professor Lee is a professor of economics and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University and leading scholar in the field of innovation, technological change, productivity, and international economics. His research has been widely published in leading economics journals like American Economic Review, QJA, etc. So we are very fortunate to have Professor Lee with us today. With this, please join me in welcoming Professor Lee.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm grateful for the hospitality that I've already received. I look forward to your questions and comments, and feel free to interrupt me in the course of the presentation if you have a question or a comment that occurs to you. I'd like to begin first by acknowledging my many co-authors, without whom this would not be possible. Sagar Bavaskar, my former student, now collaborator, Cameron Drayton, a student. Brian Fucci is a research economist at the U.S. Census Bureau. Ed Hovey is an eminent computer scientist, formerly of Carnegie Mellon, now of the University of Melbourne. Sunny Tambe is a professor at Wharton. Lee Jae-woo is another graduate student of mine. And so you can see that this is a project that involves multiple institutions, and also confidential data accessed from the United States Census Bureau. So I need to begin with a disclaimer that all my conclusions and any opinions I express are those of me and the authors, not necessarily those of the U.S. Census Bureau or the U.S. Department of Commerce. And the codes on this slide are the official disclosure codes that enable me to share some of this research with the public. All right. So what we're doing in this project is first building on prior research that uses patent data to identify AI-related invention. We're going to not just identify AI-related invention from the text of patent documents, but we're going to connect data on AI inventions to the inventing firms using microdata from the Census Bureau and also the Compugen database. Now, this complements efforts to directly measure the effect of AI adoption in the U.S. So the U.S. Census Bureau, along with a number of eminent economists, has been engaged for several years in a direct effort to survey hundreds of thousands of US enterprises on their use of AI. So far, this survey has indicated that the rate of AI adoption is quite low, lower than we might imagine, and at least in the short run, the productivity effects appear to be negative. This also relates to a different stream of work that uses data on the hiring of AI workers, often leveraging online job ad data from sources like Lightcast or Burning Glass to try and infer which firms are bringing AI experts into their organizations. The stream of research that I'm most familiar with is that authored by Tanya Babinat and her co-authors, right? Really interesting papers, but again, they tended not to find a positive impact of AI investment as they measure it on productivity. Finally, more recently, there have been a number of really fascinating randomized controlled trials, right, in which an experimental approach is used to give some workers in an organization access to AI tools, right? Deny that access to other, randomly selected workers in the same organization and see what difference it makes. And here the inference is crystal clear. It's a randomized controlled trial. And the productivity effects seem to be substantial, but we don't know anything about generality, right? How do these results generalize from the very specific narrow contexts in which the experiment was conducted? Right. So we began this project years ago, taking a machine learning approach, or maybe what I might describe as a traditional machine learning approach, right? Using the techniques of 8 or 9 years ago. But then this project was completely upended by the sudden rise of LLMs and generative AI, right? Not only did our earlier AI patent database not include the patents associated with these inventions, but it was immediately clear to us that LLMs can probably help us do a much better job of parsing patent text and figuring out whether a given patent was AI related or not. So we started all over again, using what we now call the Palify approach. This was a name coined by my collaborator, Sagar Babaskar, who's very good at coming up with catchy names for things, right? But it's easy enough to describe, right? So what did we do? We downloaded all of the patents granted by the US Patent and Trademark Office from 1990 to the fall of 2024, right? We made sure that we had at least the title and the abstract present in all these documents. And then we took a hand-curated subset of patents that we knew to be AI related. This was verified by human experts, right? And we basically asked a bunch of different LLMs and machine learning-based models, right? Is this AI or not, right? So we trained the models on a hand-selected, hand-curated set of AI and non-AI patents, right? And based on the performance of these models, we use them to enlarge our training data set, right? To classify, binary fashion, whether other patents were AI or not, right? We did this for patents granted in different years to make sure that we're tracking the evolution of AI technology, and we had humans in the loop to check, especially the edge cases, to make sure that our models were doing a reasonable job, right? Then we took our best models, we trained them on this expanded data set, and then we had them label the entire patent corpus from 1990 to 2020. Right? So once you've identified the patents, you can actually learn a number of things about the AI invention that's being traced out by those patent documents. And the first thing we learn is that AI patenting is growing very rapidly over our sample period, especially in the most recent years, right? So you can see an acceleration around 2012 when Jeff Hinton had his breakthrough with deep learning models. You can see another sharp acceleration around 2018 when transformer technology became widely, right? And that little dip at the end is simply because we stopped downloading data in the fall of 2024, right? If we continued through calendar time, I think you would have continued to see an exponential increase in the number of patents, right? So there are lots of patents. They're growing exponentially, right? In what countries are they being generated? Right, so these are US Patent and Trademark Office data. So it's going to, if anything, exaggerate the role of US firms, because US firms are going to patent first at home and then selectively patent abroad, whereas Japanese or German or Chinese firms will patent everything in their home and then selectively patent in the United States. So given that, it's not surprising that perhaps the US is generating more patents than any other country. The gap between the US and every other country might be a little surprising, and I don't think that's just an artifact of higher propensities to patent at home. But I do want to point out that Japan is number 2, right? Ahead of China, ahead of South Korea, right? And if we go back in time to earlier years when the total number of AI patents was smaller, Japan's share was actually considerably larger. And it's actually declined over time as the total number of AI patents granted has grown. Okay. So we can see a little bit about how AI patents evolve over time, right? How they're clustered in different countries. We can also see how they're distributed across patent classes. And what I want to point out with this slide is that there's no one patent class that captures all AI patents, right? Because we're looking not just at upstream algorithmic innovation, but also downstream application. And a lot of applied AI patents are classified in the patent classes that are associated with the downstream application, not necessarily the upstream original technology. So you'll find AI patents in patent classes associated with land vehicles, self-driving cars, in patent classes associated with flying vehicles, drones, in patent classes associated with medical devices, because AI is being used to process diagnostic medical images, right? You see it in patent classes associated with construction equipment, right? The self-driving, earth-moving machines being used in Australian mines, right? They're everywhere. That's why a text-based approach is absolutely necessary to find them, right? And so given this, we're increasingly confident that AI really is a general purpose technology and it's finding application throughout the technology space. We can also see how patenting is distributed across firms, right? And maybe there aren't a lot of surprises here, right? IBM has been engaged in AI patenting, I don't know, maybe even since the 1950s, right? When the artificial intelligence term was first coined. Now, IBM has obviously struggled to translate all of its AI technology into revenue for the firm, right? But you see Google there, right? You see Apple, you see Amazon, but you also see a number of Japanese companies, right? Because again, there's a lot of downstream applications. So Sony and Toyota have more AI patents granted in the United States than Facebook. NEC has more AI patents granted than Apple. Canon has more than Qualcomm. You can also use the inventor location data in patent documents to see how AI patenting is clustering within the United States, right? And so if you can, okay, my cursor isn't showing up on the screen, but that's okay. If you look at the map, right, you can see, let's see, this isn't working. All right, never mind. You can see a concentration of AI patenting in the Northeast Research Corridor, right, between Boston and Washington, D.C. on the East Coast. And of course, you see concentrations in Southern California, Northern California, and the Pacific Northwest. But for those of you who know your US geography, you can also see a clustering of patents around Detroit, Michigan. All those self-driving car patents, which don't seem to be making GM or Ford very much money right now, but there's a lot of effort. You can see a clustering near Houston, Texas, where energy companies are using AI to process the seismic energy images they generate when they try and find good places to frack underground. You can see a clustering in Florida, where the space and the aerospace industry is using AI, right? So again, it's quite distributed, more so than you might think. And this also is evident when we look at AI patenting in Japan. Again, just looking at the patents they take out in the US, right? So right now we're in the middle of the greater Tokyo region. And of course, that is the greatest concentration of AI patenting in Japan. But you also see a concentration in Nagoya, right? All those patents taken out by Toyota. You see a concentration in the Osaka, Kyoto, Kobe region and elsewhere. Awesome. Since we're in Japan, let's take another look at the top Japanese assignees in terms of US AI patents. Now, maybe there aren't a lot of surprises here in terms of the identity of these companies, right? But there are various ways that you can count AI patents and ascribe them to Japanese firms. So here we're taking a pretty stringent approach. We require that to count, right, as an AI patent for Sony, all of the inventors have to be resident in Japan at the time of the patent application, and it has to be assigned to Sony or a part of the Sony group. But of course, Sony has R&D centers outside of Japan, right? So maybe we should count all the patents that are assigned to Sony, even if they're invented or co-invented by software engineers based in the United States. And when we take that approach, the number of US AI patents owned by Japanese companies becomes even larger. The last data plot that I'm going to show you before I get into the impact of AI patenting is this one. And here what we're doing is we're looking at the patent classes assigned to these patents by US patent examiners at the time of the patent application. Right? Now, this is a little bit hard to see because the text is quite small, right? But what I'd like you to focus on are the years between the mid-2000s and the mid-2010s, right? In those years, what you see is that AI patents are drawing on a lot of different technologies, right? Sure, there's neural networks and machine learning, right? But there are lots of AI technologies being employed for different applications. But look what's happened starting in 2017, 2018, right? Almost all of the patents are neural networks or machine learning based. This is the transformer revolution. What's happening is that in the past, the relatively recent past, mid-2000s to mid-2010s, different AI technologies were used for different applications. Increasingly, one core technology, right? Transformer-based, multi-layer neural network models are being used for everything, whether it's vision, speech recognition, data analysis, right? Running regressions, right? It's all relying on the same core technology, which is really interesting, right? And one of the next steps in our research agenda is to try and use these data and the text itself to kind of break apart our aggregate notion of AI invention into different discrete AI technologies and figure out what their economic impact has been. It's probably not all going to be the same. All right, now we move from defining AI patents to trying to figure out what their economic impact is. And I first want to show you data based on results based on census data, right? So the US Census essentially surveys almost every enterprise in the US economy that's bigger than a corner lemonade stand. Right? So this is very comprehensive data. We're not just limited to large publicly traded companies. We've essentially got every enterprise in the economy. And the Patent Office has spent years and lots of effort linking the assignees identified as patent owners in the patent data to the census entities, the firms in the census microdata. Right? And we not only have panel data on the firms, right? But in principle, we can link most of these firms to the LEHD, the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics database, which is a matched employer-employee database that allows us to look at the income of every employee of every firm in every year. Right? You can tell why Census is very careful with access to these kinds of data, right? Because they don't want everybody to know how much Bill Gates makes. All right. So once we use this data mapping, right, then we can match the AI patents to the firms, and we can look at within firm changes from AI innovations at the extensive and intensive margins, right? So we can look at firms that are transitioning into AI patenting for the first time. And then we can look for the firm that's closest to that firm in the characteristic space, right? Same industry, same size, same multinational status, but that firm has not yet transitioned into AI patenting. And we can look at the difference, right? And that's about as close as we can get causal inference in these data so far, right? But we can also run standard fixed effects models where we're just looking at how, within a firm, what happens when the stock of AI patents grows, right? Does productivity increase and so on. So when we look at manufacturing firms, all manufacturing firms, what do we find? Well, when firms transition into AI patenting, there are pretty big productivity effects. The first two columns are measures of labor productivity. The first four columns are measures of labor productivity. At the end, we've got measures of total factor productivity. And all of these effects are statistically significant, but also economically significant, right? If we look at what happens within firms as their stock of AI patents increases, again, we get large and statistically and economically significant effects on productivity, right? Now, these coefficients in that second row have an elasticity interpretation, right? So, 0.148 suggests, right, that as the stock of AI patents increases by 100%, productivity grows by 15%, which may not sound like a big effect, but remember that we've got firms in our data set who went from essentially zero AI patents to hundreds or even thousands of AI patents. So I'd actually argue that these suggest very strong productivity effects. All right, but of course, AI patenting firms are very different from the average non-AI patenting firm, right? So what we really like to do is do this close match, this nearest neighbor match. And that's what we do in this table, right? And when we do that and take a kind of event study, difference and differences based approach, we still see very large, statistically significant, and economically significant effects on productivity and employment. So when firms transition into AI patenting, they expand their labor force and their labor force gets more productive, significantly so. Does AI invention widen income inequality? I mean, we might think so because there's a 30 or 40-year-old empirical literature in the United States that very convincingly ties earlier advances in information technology to increases in income inequality, right? Well, it'd be the same with AI, or maybe even worse. So using census data, we can get at this in a couple of ways. First, we can look at the impact of AI invention on production workers. We can also look at the impact of AI invention on dispersion of employee incomes using that LEHD database, where we can measure all the incomes of every employee of every firm in every year. And by the way, these aren't just wages. When employees exercise their stock options, they generate income that shows up in our data. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so we can take all these data and we can sort of measure income inequality and changes in income inequality using these percentile ratios. These are standard in the labor economics literature, right? And so let me just cut to the point. We don't see a statistically significant impact of AI invention on income inequality, right? We don't see an impact on production. There's not anything that's statistically significant, right? So maybe there's something going on, but it doesn't rise above the level of statistical noise. So it's very interesting, right? Big significant effects on productivity, no significant effect on income inequality in either direction. All right. Well, the results that I showed you with census data are based on an earlier AI patent data set, right? We're updating those results, but they haven't gone through the formal disclosure process yet, so I can't show them with you. I can tell you that qualitatively, they're very similar to what you see, right? What I can do is use CompuStat data and our most recent AI patent database to get a different look on how AI invention is impacting the productivity of publicly traded firms, right? Which tend to be large and important in the economy, though not that large in number, okay? So we don't take a DEA approach, right? We estimate standard Cobb-Douglas productions, right? Production functions, and either you can put a measure of AI invention directly in the production function, or you can calculate the residuals and regress the residuals on the AI measure. We've done it both ways. A bottom line is that when we do this, we get a positive and statistically significant effect of AI invention on firm productivity in these data as well, right? And that's true whether we're looking at total factor productivity or labor productivity. And again, you can give these a kind of elasticity interpretation. right? They're fairly similar to the earlier results. And again, we've got firms that are going from 0 AI patents to hundreds or thousands. So these imply pretty significant productivity effects. And in the same way that we did with our census data, right? We can take these data and we can do a difference in differences propensity score matching event study approach, where we look at a publicly traded firm, we find its nearest neighbor in characteristic space, and we look at how the firm that's transitioning into AI patenting for the first time changes relative to its nearest neighbor that doesn't. And again, we see effects that are very consistent with what I showed you based on the census data, right? So it takes a while for AI patenting to show up in productivity, and that makes sense, right? Firms typically patent early on in the R&D process in order to protect their intellectual property rights. It logically takes them a few years to work that new idea into their portfolio of products and services up to the point where it's impacting their sales and therefore productivity as we measure it. But the productivity effects are showing up right on time. And if you look at that final coefficient, it suggests about a 30% level increase in productivity within 5 years of transition into AI. Right? So these are big effects, right? And these are not big effects that are discovered in a randomized controlled trial that only involved 1,500 workers in one insurance company in Wichita, Kansas. This is drawn from the entire economy. Right? And we're looking at multiple cohorts of AI inventions over many years, right? So on average, it seems to be generating big productivity increases for the inventing firms. And we can't yet say anything about what the downstream productivity impact is on the firms that might be using this technology or adopting it, right? Or using it as an input into their own R&D processes. But these are still early days in the AI revolution. And if it's going to have an impact anywhere, it should even have an impact first in the firms that are creating the new technology. That's where we should see the productivity showing up first. And we see it. And the effect's pretty big. Right, so maybe I could, summarize, where we are so far. So I think we demonstrated that AI-based approaches can identify AI-related patents. Right? So we're using AI to study AI. And I mean, that's sort of interesting, right? I could not have done this research 15 years ago. And now I can, right? And not just me, but there are other research groups, here in Japan, right? Some elsewhere that are doing similar work, right? We find strong relationships between AI invention and the subsequent productivity growth of AI inventing firms. Right? So these effects are persistent, they're statistically significant, they're economically large, and I think quite encouraging. Right? So for people who really believe, that AI is going to take us to a place where productivity is going to be higher, I think, this is strong evidence in favor of the field. And we see a positive impact of AI invention on productivity at both the extensive margin, right, the transition into AI patenting for the first time, and the intensive margin, the accumulation of larger stocks of AI inventions. And at least so far, none of this seems to be having much of an impact on income inequality, either in a positive direction or a negative direction. Finally, it's not just American firms that are taking out AI patents, right? Japanese firms are taking out a significant number. Chinese firms are taking out a significant number. South Korean firms are taking out a significant number. Right. So for a research institute that's interested in AI invention in Asia, right, just looking at these data might be useful in terms of giving you a sense of where that invention is taking place and what effect it's having around the world. So where are we going? Well, we want to complete our update, right? And of course, we're going to be updating this, not just once, but probably every couple of years. Because the technology keeps changing, it keeps improving, right? Those of you who are IT people, right, and are perhaps using Claude Code now to do your own work, right? Well, 2 years ago, you didn't have a tool that was nearly as good as Claude Code. And now you've got a better tool than you're having, right? Where are we going to be in another 2 years? We want to examine the impacts of different kinds of AI technologies across industries and across technologies and across countries, right? And I'd love to extend these analyses to Japanese firms, right? And not just use their AI patents taken out in the US, but also their AI patents taken out at home, right? Because there are thousands of additional patents that we haven't looked at yet that may be indicative of technologies that are having a positive effect right here in Japan, right? And of course, we have developed a method for tracking AI technology, but in principle, you could train LLMs to read patents and identify inventions in other kinds of technologies, robotics, green technology, fintech, right? I mean, whatever you're interested in, right? We now have AI smart enough to read millions of patents very quickly and pick out the inventions of interest. I think I have a little bit more time left, right? You've been a very quiet audience. You haven't asked me any troubling questions yet. Maybe I'll just take a minute or two to talk about some related work, and then I'll wrap up. All right. So not all AI inventions are patented, right? I mean, Open AI and Anthropic take out some patents, right? But there's also a lot of invention that they haven't patented, right? And there's some kinds of companies using AI or innovating with AI that don't patent at all, like quantitative hedge funds, right? So quantitative hedge funds like Renaissance or Two Sigma, right, or proprietary trading companies like Jane Street that use lots of AI, they will hire Carnegie Mellon PhD students and pay them between $300,000 and $500,000 US per year right out of grad school. I'll just let those numbers sink in for a moment, right? What kinds of vacations these people go on, right? Can you imagine? Right? They should come to Japan, right? Buy a city. All right. Anyway, right. So obviously these skills are valued. We don't have any patents, right? How do we figure out what's going on, right? Well, this pyramid in the lower left-hand corner of the slide is meant to suggest the kind of pyramid of human capital that any company has to create within itself if it's going to take frontier AI knowledge and use it to re-engineer or improve the goods and services for them, right? So in the lower levels of the pyramid, you're going to need lots of people with maybe fairly basic levels of AI skill, right? People with undergraduate CS or IS degrees, or maybe people who've just taught themselves how to use TensorFlow, yeah? Right? But at the apex of that pyramid, if you want to use frontier AI knowledge, you're probably going to need to hire some people who've been trained in the labs run by the top computer scientists in the world, the people who are actually at the scientific frontier, right? So imagine that we could identify those people and then we could follow them as they move around the world. We could track them across countries and time and organizational boundaries. Wherever these people are congregating in a critical mass, those could be the places where AI innovation at the frontier is taking place, whether we see patterns or not. So maybe you guys can see where I'm going with this, right? There's a pyramid of human capital that has to exist, right? The folks at the apex of that pyramid are really important, and they're very limited in number relative to demand for their skills, right? That's why a marginal PhD student from Carnegie Mellon with the right skill can just walk right into a job paying $500,000 a year from the get-go, right? I mean, I haven't earned $500,000 in a year of my life, right? So, where these people go is probably going to be very important in determining how frontier AI science gets turned into new products and services, right? So can we track them in this way? Well, yeah, maybe we can, right? So I'm involved in a parallel project that uses publication data to identify the world's top 2,000 academic experts in computer science. And they're all over the world, and there's some right here in Japan. Right? And then we use their websites, faculty websites, lab websites, CVs, to link these top scientists to their graduate students. And in the United States, we can use data from Revelio Labs, right, which basically have LinkedIn profiles, scraped LinkedIn profiles on over 500 million people worldwide. And that over 500 million people includes most of the software engineers working in the United States in private industry. So we can track them as they move from Carnegie Mellon and Stanford and MIT to Google. And then we can track them as they move from Google to an AI startup. And so we can build within our firm data a kind of stock, right, of these top elite computer science AI experts. And we can see if those stocks have an impact on productivity or output or AI patenting. And by the way, they do. All right, well, maybe I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your speech. It's very insightful. I have two questions. So the first question will be more focusing on, because you have mentioned your survey and your data not only focusing on large firms, but also the small, maybe medium enterprises in the United States. So what are the observations there? Because I suspect there may be a threshold for AI where realization may not come true to that particular firm at this point. And second question will more be like, because cross-country there could be a lot of differences. I think the World Bank, one of the 2026 report has been actually talking about how different countries need to have, there used to be like general purpose in technology. You can jump through this like skill tree, but now leapfrogging is also preconditioned. So as your work expands internationally, how do you expect we should adjust those country differences, and how we can better and also like, because I can imagine like a very expensive top talent of one of the 2000s is very expensive for people to hire, and even it's not like a company to hire one of those 2000s. It's like country will be very hard to get that one of the 2000s. So how do you expect that can impact the future of genetics zone?
Yeah, so those are a lot of questions. All right, so let me try to unpack them. Let's start with the first one, right? So, I mean, this is actually what we're working on now, right? You know, the difference between the impact of either invention or, you know, these highly skilled, you know, elite experts on small firms versus large firms, right? We actually think that some of the biggest effects are going to be on relatively young startups, right? That kind of begin their organizational lives at the technological frontier, right? And, you know, they have very good ideas, right? They patent some of them. They hire a number of these experts. We think we're going to find big effects.
Yes.
I mean, as you might expect, you know, it's a little hard, right, to trace all that to like more than 1 million enterprises in the U.S. economy. So I can't give you the answer yet, but I'm hoping that within a few months we will have an answer, right, to how this affects Gary. Right. So, I mean, I think, you know, in general, there are, you know, big companies that are making very good use of this stuff. Right. But there's also going to be, you know, a somewhat special subset of smaller companies that are seeing even bigger effects from this. Right. Because they were kind of born AI, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. What about like existing SMEs that has already been operating? They are not like in their entrepreneur stage. They already.
Yeah, so I think, you know, there it's sort of interesting, right? I mean, I think for existing SMEs, it's less likely that, you know, inventing their own frontier AI is going to be important. I think what's going to be more important is their ability to utilize AI that's developed elsewhere. But this is already happening in a way that I think we're not capturing with our measures, right? Including the survey the Census Bureau has been using to try and measure AI adoption. Right. So I was born in the state of Kentucky, right? Kentucky Fried Chicken. Everybody's heard of that, right? Right. So let's imagine that I'm a franchisee, right? I own like 100 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in the southeastern United States. Okay. And the Census Bureau sends me this adoption survey, right? You know, dear Mr. Sanders, you know, have you adopted any AI technology? Yes or no? I'm going to look at this and say no. Right? You know, I don't have any, you know, fancy computer scientists from MIT or Stanford that I'm paying $500,000 a year. You know, I run Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants, right? But what's true is this, right? I screen all of the job applicants using Indeed AI, right? I regularly use Google Analytics to see what's going on with my website. AI, right? I use Amazon Web Services to make sure, right, that, my chicken meat, right, and my potatoes and my plastic cups are being delivered to my locations at the right time. That's AI, right? It wasn't necessarily AI when I first started outsourcing some of my IT to cloud-based providers, but they're using IT all the time. I mean, they're using AI all the time, and I'm just not directly involved in that adoption decision, but I'm indirectly adopting AI through my purchases of these web services, right? So the problem with our adoption studies is that we're not asking the questions in the right way. And I'm pretty sure if we did, we would see that AI adoption, even by, Mr. Sanders, who runs 100 Kentucky Fried Chicken outlets in the southeastern United States, those adoption rates could be 50 or 60% already, right? And the pathway is gigantic companies offering AI-based services in a very user-friendly way to small and medium-sized companies, hundreds of them, thousands of them, millions of them, at low marginal cost.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. First of all, Professor, thanks so much for that. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the results where you mentioned, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but like within firm income inequality was not increasing, right? Like, so that's what
Or decreasing.
or decreasing.
They just want to change again.
Yeah, and just wanted to know how that was measured because I'm thinking it could be could it be the fact that they're just not hiring entry level workers anymore, and so everyone's coalescing towards a more, for lack of a better word, like a more manager style roles.
Yeah. The only people that are hiring are graduate students from MIT whom they're paying $500,000 a year.
Yeah, precisely.
Right?
So,
And everybody else is fired. So, you only have one salary man. So at the moment, here's what we find, right? First of all, employment actually grows. It doesn't shrink after AI invention, right? And the way that we're measuring income inequality is we're using these 90/10th, 90/50, 50/10th percentile ratios, which are these standard, measures in labor economics. But do I really think that there is no impact? No, right? I don't, right? I just think that we're still at an early stage. We're only looking at the impact on the AI inventing firms. And we just haven't had enough time yet to see, what the impact is going to be. I mean, if you ask me what I think the impact is going to be, well, because we've got 30 or 40 years of historical evidence of IT innovation causing an expansion of income inequality, I'm likely to believe that that's more likely than not, right? And so that will probably require some government policies to try and cushion people against this. But it's at least possible that AI could be completely different. Why? Because now with AI, right, a novice programmer like my son, who took his first coding course, right, this past fall, can get hold of Claude Code, right, and use that tool to write really good software, right? And, you really want to have a human in the loop to make sure that, there aren't serious flaws with what gets created, right? But it's at least conceivable that AI could be this kind of leveler that really levels the playing field between very advanced individuals and less trained individuals, or even between advanced countries and less advanced countries. I do think that there are some leapfrogging possibilities. So which one of these effects dominates in the long run? I think it's going to be really interesting to see. Right? I guess I'm a little pessimistic just because we have these 40 years of history, right? I think on balance, probably it's going to increase income inequality. But that's not a sure bet.
Thanks so much. I'm just really excited to read this paper after this presentation because me and Chen were also working on an AI paper. We are trying to find the impact of AI on productivity, especially for labor and capital. But I just have a question. I'm always confused on like how to distinguish like the impact of AI on capital and the labor, because in your model it seems like these like combined within this leadership. I'm just wondering, what is the specification of your complex definition and how did you find it?
Yeah, so we're looking at the impact on both total factor productivity and labor productivity, right? And of course, we've run a lot of regressions that I don't show you in these slides, right? But in both those, we are controlling for capital as best we can, right? But we're using the firm's own accounts, right, to control for capital, right? So that's not necessarily perfect in an AI era, right? In which some firms, at least, are importing AI related digital services from other providers, right? They're not paying for that capital, right, or that labor themselves. They're just bringing that as an input, right? So this gets back to our earlier discussion, right, of how we can really measure adoption in a world, right, where a lot of the adoption is being mediated by big tech companies that are offering an expanding suite of really valuable services to small and medium-sized enterprises, right? But in terms of the standard approach that economists take, right, there's a firm level capital stock measure that's in there in the total factor productivity regression, right? And we also try and control for capital when we look at the impact on labor productivity, right? So, if we think that the standard approach taken by economists is a reasonable one, then there is an impact on labor incomes. And it's positive and statistically significant and not small.
And what is the approximation we use for labor? For example, in Marina paper, they use shell AI workers in the company. But what if you want to see the impact on capital, which will be the approximation for capital?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, we're looking at the capital stock as measured in the standard way, right? We're looking at capital expenditures. We're using a propensity score, a perpetual inventory method to kind of build capital stock by firm over time, right? That's what we do with CompuStat data. That's what the Census Bureau does, when they compute this in the census microdata. When we're looking at AI, we're looking at the impact of AI invention, right? So the appearance of the first AI patent or the accumulation of AI patents in an AI patent stock, right? We are not at this point separately controlling for AI workers, except when we look at these children of the immortal scholars who move into a firm. But we could, right? So we can't do it in the same way that Labina did because we don't have the Lightcast data, but we've got the LinkedIn data, right? So we can use our LinkedIn profiles on more than 500 million people to construct within companies a stock of the people who have AI skills at various levels, right? Including the graduate students from MIT who are making $500,000 a year. But we haven't done that yet. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Gets that?
So, in the DID model you use, how do you handle the selection problem? Like, you compare firms both in the first stage of transitioning to firms like having transitioning to AI. You mentioned, like, how do you because there might be like heterogeneous problems.
There might be. And again, the best that we can do is to exploit the fact that we've got data on more than 1 million enterprises, right? To find the nearest neighbor in technology space characteristic space that's not doing the transition, right? So you're right? Big companies that spend a lot on R&D and generate a lot of patents are different from firms that don't, right? But what if we've got one firm that spends a lot on R&D and generates a lot of patents, and we've got another firm, right, that spends exactly the same amount of R&D and generates the same amount of patents, except that this firm has generated an AI patent and this firm hasn't, right? That's the comparison that we're doing. Now, it's still not a randomized controlled trial, right? But we're not going to get an economy-wide measure of the impact of AI on productivity from a randomized controlled trial. We're just not, right? The generalizability problem is too great. Okay, so we're taking a step back in terms of our ability to make exact causal inference, but what we get as an ability to measure the impact of AI invention across the entire economy. Okay. And so I guess for us, that's a step worth making. Now, there may be labor economists in the Quarterly Journal of Economics that would agree, but I already published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, so I don't have to care. So that addresses your question. Yeah.
Just one question about income inequality
Yeah.
and related to the future work. And so do you plan to kind of extend this work into like measuring the impact of AI in not at a firm level, but like for example in the region level, states or the city, about the income inequality, unemployment?
Yeah, yes. So, I mean, in the long run, we'd love to, right? But it's going to be really hard, right? Because again, I mean, I think the big macro effects at the end of the day are only going to be partly driven by what happens inside the AI inventing companies, right? Because for every AI inventing company, there are 1,000 potentially AI using enterprises. And what really matters is what happens to the AI using enterprises, right? But the problem is that we don't have a good tool for measuring that use for the reasons that I already talked about at the beginning. But the big AI service providers have lots of data on that, right? I mean, Anthropic knows all of its customers, right? Maybe there are some in this room. It knows all of its customers, and it not only knows who they are, it knows what these customers are asking of their tools, right? So, I mean, it's a little hard to imagine right now, maybe, all of these companies somehow cooperating with a national government or even an international organization to make these data available to researchers in a way that doesn't compromise strategically sensitive information of the firm. Right? But if we could just indulge our imaginations for a minute, right? You could imagine, I don't know, maybe in Geneva, Switzerland, right? There's a room kind of sealed off from everything else, right? And there are a handful of experts that can look at AI use around the world, right? And they can match these measures of AI use, right? From the service providers to the industrial censuses run by all the major economies. Right. Now, if we had that data, we could do exactly what we're talking about. Right. And we would actually see which of these effects dominates, right? Increasing income inequality by making our super coders super duper coders, right? Or is it an income leveling effect because it enables the novices to start to approach the skills of the excellent? But I think it's going to be a long time. Right. And I might be long dead before I can imagine, companies and countries collaborating in that way. But there are a lot of bright young people in the room. So, maybe that's a dream that you guys can work. Yeah.
Professor. So your presentation is actually very light. And my question, may I go to the conclusion slide of your presentation?
Not this one.
Not this one.
Okay.
People.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag here. Not the future work.
One.
Oops, overshot. Yes, that one.
Yes, this one. Reading
Yeah.
my conclusions. Maybe one page before.
Oh, one page before.
Reading
Okay. Oops.
Yes, when I'm looking at this page.
Yeah. I need AI to help me with that.
I'm more like a kind of macro guy. So
Okay.
looking at this page is very enlightening and forces me to think about what is the distinguishing feature of the AI shock this time compared to the shocks in the history. For example, the dot-com shock from the 2000s. I think it hurts nothing to understand both dot-com shock and AI shock this time, both at TLP shocks. But from a macro perspective, how do you think, if you have any intuition on this, how do you think is the difference of the AI shock this time on macroeconomics in terms of maybe inflation in the GDP from maybe aggregate supply side or aggregate demand side compared to some other classical TLP shocks in the history?
That's a great question.
Yes.
That's a great question.
What's the difference?
Yeah.
Is it
So, I mean, maybe there's not as much of a difference as we would think. All right. I mean, it's very interesting to be an economist, right, who now interacts a lot with computer scientists. It's challenging, right? But one of the great things about being an outsider, right, when two people who are within a discipline are like fighting it out amongst themselves, is that you bring a completely different perspective to the debate. Okay. So one way of thinking about AI is that it's just a continuation of an IT revolution that started before the 1980s, right? Only began to have a perceptible increase on productivity growth in the mid 1990s, right? And is now going through an evolutionary phase, but it's more of an evolutionary phase rather than a real revolution, right? So if that's right, then the earlier IT shock of the 90s might be a great way for us to think about what the ultimate impact of the AI shock might be. Right. I mean, after all, at some level, it's bits doing stuff, right? And now we've just got these algorithms that enable us to do a lot more stuff with the bits. Right. The counter arguments, right, is really in kind of the ease of use, right? I mean, if I think about what I had to do if I wanted to wire my company up to the internet for the first time in the 1990s, right? I mean, I had to hire some consulting firm, right? I guess they call themselves Accenture or Deloitte, right? Or one of these outfits, to come into my company, right? Like literally come into the premises of my company and like install cables and boxes with microprocessors in them, right? And, create an internal network that would let these boxes talk to each other. And I had to completely retrain my employees, right? They were working on pencil and paper, and now they're going to be typing numbers into a computing system and they're going to be tracking it that way, right? I mean, it was difficult. Right? I mean, can you imagine Mr. Sanders in Kentucky with his 100, Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants moving from paper and pencil to an intranet, right? The great thing about AI is that the machine does so much more of the work, right? And it's coming to us in the cloud that is already built, right? So maybe it will be like the dot-com shock, but it will be faster, right? And it will go farther because the ease of use and implementation is so much greater, right? You don't have to have a degree from Carnegie Mellon to use this stuff. All you need is a little bit of patience and curiosity, and anybody can be a prompt engineer. And maybe most of the people in this room have already become prompt engineers to some extent, right? So I don't know which of these is correct, right? I'm thinking it's probably going to take a little bit more time than Wall Street thinks it will. So I kind of incline more to this is going to be like the dot-com shock, but it could be different. And we just don't know yet.
It's time, but of course the discussion is getting really interesting. But there's a very strict time that we have to follow today. So
I understand.
So because of that, you'll have to close here. And if there's any question, you can always write to Professor. We'll share Professor's email address with you, and we can continue this discussion. But this, let us give a round of applause to Professor.